It was a bright afternoon at the Naval SEAL Base, the kind of day when the air carried both the smell of the ocean and the faint scent of fuel from the nearby docks. Sailors moved about quickly, each one busy with their duties. The sound of boots hitting the concrete mixed with a low hum of engines from vessels anchored close to shore. At the front gate, a figure appeared, a woman, quiet and still, walking with a steady but unhurried pace. She wasn't in uniform. She wore simple clothes, the kind anyone could wear, and carried nothing but a small shoulder bag. Her short hair was brushed neatly, and there was a certain calmness in her eyes that didn't match the alert, tense expressions of the guards on duty. When she reached the checkpoint, the guard stepped forward as he always did. His job was routine: check identification, confirm clearance, wave in those who belonged and turn away those who didn't. He asked for her name. She gave it quietly, almost like she was telling him a secret she didn't want the world to hear. He scanned the roster. Her name wasn't there. "Ma'am, you're not cleared for entry," he said in a firm but respectful tone. She didn't argue. She didn't frown or raise her voice. She simply looked at him, as if she had already expected this answer. Then she said softly, "I have my reasons for being here." Her calmness was strange. Most people, when told they couldn't come in, would get frustrated, maybe even angry. But she stood there like a statue, her hands folded in front of her, her gaze steady and unreadable. Another guard came over to see what was going on. The first guard explained the situation. "She's not on the list, refuses to leave, says she has a reason to be here." The second guard tried. "Ma'am, if you don't have clearance, we can't let you in. This is a restricted area." The woman just gave a small nod, as though she understood every word, but had no intention of turning around. By now, a couple of other personnel noticed the small standoff. A few stopped to watch. On a base where everything usually ran like clockwork, something unusual like this drew attention fast. The call went through to the base's security office. Standard protocol: if someone without clearance refused to leave, they needed to be escorted out. That was the rule. The guards moved a little closer, one on each side, ready to guide her toward the gate and away from the restricted area. But there was something about her that made them hesitate. It wasn't anything aggressive, quite the opposite. She stood so quietly, so sure of herself, that it almost felt wrong to put hands on her. "Ma'am, we're going to have to ask you to step outside the gate now," one of them said, keeping his tone even. She turned her head slightly, glancing toward the buildings beyond the fence. Her eyes lingered there for a moment, as if she could see something the others couldn't. Then she looked back at the guard. "I can't leave," she said simply. Those words weren't loud. They weren't said in a demanding way, but they carried weight. They made the guards pause just long enough for a few more people to wander over, curious about the quiet stranger who wouldn't go. Someone from the office radioed again, telling the guards to hurry up and clear the area. A couple of younger sailors, off duty, were whispering nearby. They were guessing who she might be. A lost tourist? A reporter? Someone's relative? Nobody knew, and she wasn't offering an explanation. What was strange was how she didn't seem nervous. She didn't fidget, didn't glance around for an escape, didn't try to explain herself quickly to avoid trouble. She just stood there, watching the scene around her unfold, like she was in no rush at all. Finally, one of the guards sighed and reached for the radio clipped to his vest. "Better call the colonel," he said to his partner. The other guard frowned. "The colonel? You think this is worth his time?" "Trust me," the first one said. "I don't know why, but something about her. We should let him see for himself." A short message went through the radio. Minutes later, a tall man in a crisp uniform appeared from the main building, walking toward the gate with a determined stride. His rank pins caught the sunlight, and the way everyone nearby straightened their backs told you exactly who he was: the base's commanding officer. He looked from the guards to the woman. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice firm, not wasting time on small talk. The guard answered quickly. "Sir, she's not on the roster, no clearance, refuses to leave. Says she has her reasons for being here, but won't explain further." The colonel stepped closer to the woman. She stood her ground, meeting his eyes without fear. He was used to people looking away when he stared at them. Not her. "Ma'am, this is a restricted base," he said, his tone sharp and official. "You need to leave immediately, or we will have to escort you out." And that's when he noticed her left hand. The colonel's eyes landed on something small but unmistakable. On the woman's left hand, there was a silver ring. Not just any ring. The design was unique, something that could only belong to a very specific group of people. It was a seal insignia ring, the kind given to those who had completed some of the toughest military training in the world. It wasn't shiny or new. The edges were worn smooth, and there were tiny scratches across the surface, the kind you don't get from keeping it in a box. It had been used, lived in. It had history. The colonel's step slowed, and his voice shifted just slightly. "Where did you get that ring?" he asked. The woman didn't answer right away. She glanced at the ring herself, almost as if she'd forgotten it was there. Then she looked back at him and said quietly, "I earned it." Those 3 words made the air around them feel heavier. The guards exchanged quick glances. They'd seen seal rings before, but only on the hands of men from their own units. Women in the SEALs were almost unheard of, and the few who made it through training were legends. Their names passed around in stories that sounded almost too impossible to be true. The colonel studied her face. Something in his eyes changed, though his expression stayed mostly serious. "When?" he asked, his tone less like an order now, and more like a question he genuinely wanted answered. "A long time ago," she said, "under a name you wouldn't recognize." The guards didn't move. Nobody said a word. It was as if the whole scene had frozen in place for a few seconds. The colonel finally broke the silence. "Everyone step back," he told the others. His voice carried authority, and they obeyed without question. He kept his eyes on her. "You served." "Yes," she replied. "But that's not why I'm here today." Her voice was calm, but had a depth to it, like someone who'd lived through things most people couldn't imagine. There was no bragging in her tone, no attempt to impress anyone, just a simple statement of fact. By now, a couple more people had gathered at a distance, pretending to be busy but obviously curious. You could feel the shift in the atmosphere. This wasn't just a case of unauthorized visitor at the gate anymore. Something much deeper was unfolding. The colonel's jaw tightened slightly. "Then why are you here?" She looked past him, toward the buildings inside the base. Her eyes stayed fixed there as she answered. "Someone I knew, someone who once wore the same uniform, is inside. And I need to see him. Today." Her voice didn't rise, but there was something in it, a kind of urgency that was quiet yet impossible to ignore. The colonel hesitated. There were rules. Strict ones. But there was also a certain understanding among people who'd been through the same battles, even if those battles weren't always on record. He gestured for her to wait. "Don't move from here." And with that he turned and walked back toward the gate office, his boots hitting the pavement with sharp, deliberate steps. The guards watched him go, then looked back at the woman. One of them finally asked, "Who are you really?" She didn't answer. She just looked down at her ring, turning it slightly with her thumb, like it was both a comfort and a reminder. The minutes ticked by slowly, the distant sounds of the base filling the silence, the clang of metal, the rumble of a truck engine, the call of orders somewhere far down the dock. The colonel reappeared, this time with a different expression on his face. It wasn't exactly a smile, but the sharp edges in his eyes had softened. "Come with me," he said. The woman didn't move at first. She seemed to weigh the colonel's words in her mind before finally stepping forward. Her walk was steady, not rushed, and she didn't look around at the people watching. If she noticed the stares, she ignored them. The guards stepped aside, making room for her to pass. It wasn't because of any official order. It was something in her presence. A quiet authority. The colonel led her down the short road that connected the gate to the main part of the base. The sounds of activity grew louder the farther they walked. Heavy boots pounding on concrete, voices calling out orders, machinery clanking in the distance. As they passed a group of young sailors, the colonel gave a subtle glance that told them not to ask questions. They obeyed, but their curious eyes followed her until she disappeared around the corner. Inside the main administrative building, the air was cooler, carrying the faint smell of coffee and paper. The colonel stopped outside his office and gestured for her to enter. She stepped inside and remained standing, her hands lightly clasped in front of her. The colonel closed the door behind them, cutting off the muffled sounds from outside. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "You don't show up at a SEAL base after years of being gone without a reason," he said. His voice wasn't accusing, more like someone trying to piece together a puzzle. "I wouldn't be here if it wasn't important," she replied. He leaned against the edge of his desk, arms crossed. "That ring, it's not just handed out. I know every woman who's ever earned one, and I don't remember you." She gave a faint smile, not of amusement, but of recognition. "You wouldn't. My service record isn't in the files you've seen." The colonel's brow furrowed. "Black operations?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she said, "I served under an alias. My missions weren't meant for public record. Not then, not now." There was a pause. The colonel had dealt with classified cases before. People like her didn't talk unless there was no other choice. "Why today?" he asked finally. Her voice softened, but her eyes didn't waver. "There's a man here. Someone I once fought beside. He's not doing well. I heard he's here, and I can't let time run out without seeing him." The colonel straightened slowly. "Who is he?" She hesitated, as though speaking the name might open a door she had kept locked for years. "He was on a mission with me overseas. A mission that never made it to the news. I saved his life once, and now I need to say goodbye." The room was quiet for a long moment. The hum of the air conditioning was the only sound. Finally, the colonel pushed away from the desk. "Wait here," he said. "I'll find out where he is." He stepped out of the office, leaving her alone. She didn't sit down. Instead, she moved to the window, looking out at the base she hadn't walked through in years. The sounds, the smells, the distant shouts, they brought back memories she wasn't ready to relive just yet. Outside, the colonel was already speaking to someone in low tones. From the way his voice dropped, it was clear he wasn't just asking routine questions. He was trying to confirm something important. Back in the office, the woman took a slow breath. She touched the ring again, her fingers brushing over the worn surface. Whatever had happened all those years ago, it still lived in her like a shadow. The door opened again, and the colonel stepped inside. His face was unreadable. "I found him," he said. The woman's eyes didn't blink when she heard the words. "I found him." For a moment, she didn't move, as if her body needed a second to catch up with her mind. Then she nodded once. "Take me to him." The colonel studied her face for a moment before answering. "Before I do, I need to know one thing." She waited. "That ring," he said, his voice low but steady. "I've served with enough men and women to know what it means. I've buried friends who wore it. It's not just a piece of metal. So I'll ask again, where did you get it?" She looked down at her hand, turning the ring with her thumb, the faintest glint of light catching the engraved insignia. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, almost like she was talking to herself. "I earned it. Every mile, every bruise, every night I thought I wouldn't make it. I didn't get a ceremony. No photos. No handshake for the cameras. Just the ring and the right to wear it." The colonel didn't interrupt. She went on. "I served in places you'll never see in a report. Places that officially don't exist. There were no medals for what we did. Just the mission. And the people we kept alive." Her eyes lifted to meet his. "One of them is here. That's why I came." The colonel held her gaze. There was no doubt in his mind now. She was telling the truth. He'd seen that look before in people who had been through the fire and somehow walked out. Without another word, he opened the office door. "Follow me." They stepped out into the sunlight, walking side by side. She didn't speak, and neither did he. The air felt heavy, carrying the weight of things neither of them could say out loud. As they made their way across the base, they passed groups of sailors, some laughing, some in the middle of drills. A few glanced up at the sight of the colonel escorting a civilian woman, an unusual sight on a secure base. But the look on his face kept anyone from stopping them. Finally, They reached a low, quiet building on the far side of the compound. The sign outside marked it as a medical unit. The colonel stopped at the door and looked at her. "He's inside," he said softly. "But before we go in, I need you to know, he's not the same man you remember. Time and life have changed him." Her hand tightened slightly around the strap of her bag. "So have I," she said. The colonel opened the door, and a cool wave of air met them. The hallway smelled faintly of antiseptic, mixed with the muted hum of medical machines somewhere beyond the walls. A nurse at the front desk glanced up, ready to ask questions, but the colonel gave her a small nod, the kind that said, "It's fine. Let her through." They walked slowly down the corridor, the woman's footsteps almost silent. Her heart was beating faster now, though her face remained calm. Memories pressed at the edges of her mind, flashes of heat, dust, and the chaos of a mission where every second had counted. And in those memories there was him, the man she had come to see. The colonel stopped outside her room and placed his hand gently on the doorframe. "He's in here." She took a deep breath, steadying herself. And then, for the first time since arriving at the base, her voice trembled just slightly. "Let me go in alone." The colonel gave a small nod and stepped aside. She pushed the door open. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a lamp in the corner. A thin curtain was pulled halfway across the window, letting in just a slice of daylight. The air inside was still, except for the quiet beeping of a monitor beside the bed. Lying there was a man whose body told the story of years lived hard. His hair was thinner now, his face lined, and his skin carried the pale tone of someone who had been indoors too long. But even in his frailty, there was something about his posture, the way his hands rested, the shape of his jaw, that she recognized instantly. She stepped inside slowly, closing the door behind her. For a moment, she just stood there, taking him in. Memories began to surface, sharp and clear, the echo of gunfire, the weight of gear on her back, the feeling of hot dust on her skin. And right there in the middle of it all, this man, younger and stronger than, his voice in her ear telling her to keep moving, even when everything seemed impossible. She moved closer to the bed. His eyes were closed, but his breathing was steady. She reached out, hesitated, then gently placed her hand over his. His eyes opened, slow and unsure, like he wasn't sure if he was awake or dreaming. He stared at her for a moment, confusion flickering across his face. Then his gaze fell to her hand and the ring. Something in his expression shifted. His lips parted, and in a voice rough with time and fatigue, he whispered, "It's you." She smiled, but it was a smile laced with sadness. "It's me." For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was full, not empty, carrying years of things that didn't need to be explained. Finally, he said, "I thought you were gone. Everyone did." "I had to disappear," she replied softly. "It was the only way." His eyes searched hers, like he was looking for proof that she was real. "You saved my life. Twice. You know that." Her smile deepened just a little. "Once officially," she said. "The other time doesn't count unless you tell the story." He let out a faint laugh, but it faded quickly into a cough. She stayed close, her hand still over his, her thumb brushing lightly across his skin. "I heard you were here," she said. "I couldn't let the chance pass. I needed to see you, to say goodbye, if I had to." His eyes glistened, and for a moment, he didn't look like the man lying in a hospital bed. He looked like the same determined, fierce teammate she remembered, the one who refused to give up no matter the odds. "I'm glad you came," he said quietly. "I didn't think I'd get to see another face from back then." They stayed there, holding on to each other's presence, letting the weight of the past settle between them. Outside the door, footsteps passed now and then, but neither of them noticed. This was their moment, unplanned, unannounced, and long overdue. For a long time, they didn't speak, they didn't need to. The silence felt like a bridge between years that had been lost. She sat in the chair beside his bed, her hand still in his, and the steady beep of the monitor became almost like a clock marking the seconds they had left together. Finally, he broke the silence. "You know, I still tell the story. The one they said we couldn't talk about. I just changed the names." She smiled faintly. You always did have a way of bending the rules." He chuckled softly, though his voice was weak. Only when it mattered. She looked at him for a moment, studying his face, and the thought struck her that this might be the last time she'd see it. Not the strong, fearless teammate she remembered, but the man who had lived through it all and carried those years quietly, the same way she did. "I never forgot," she said gently. "Not the mission. Not you. Not a single day of it." He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, there was a trace of peace there. "Then it was worth it," he whispered. A knock came at the door. The colonel stepped in quietly, not wanting to intrude, but aware of the time. He glanced at her and gave a small nod, the kind of nod soldiers give to one another when words aren't enough. She stood slowly, her hand sliding from his, but not before giving it one last squeeze. He tried to speak again, but she leaned down and said softly, "Rest. You've earned it." She turned toward the door, and as she walked past the colonel, he straightened in silent respect. Without a word, he fell into step beside her, walking her out of the building. Outside, the late afternoon light had shifted to gold. The base was quieter now, the rush of the day giving way to the slower pace of evening. They walked together until they reached the gate. The colonel finally spoke. "You didn't have to come back here, but I'm glad you did." She gave a small smile. "So am I." And with that, she stepped through the gate, the sound of the ocean carrying faintly in the distance. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Some bonds didn't break, even when years and silence tried to bury them. The colonel watched her go until she disappeared into the fading light, a quiet figure with a story that would never be told in full, but one that would be remembered by the few who had been there to see it.